Hi everyone, Ivan Zosimov here. So today we're going to talk about how Charlie Kirk won the Groyper War. Yeah, that's right. Um, so I think, the Groyper War, just to kind of recap, it was this sort of conflict with campus conservatives between Charlie Kirk's TPUSA movement and the Groypers, who are sort of led by Nick Fuentes, this online paleo-conservative YouTube personality. And basically how this would work is, sort of America First hecklers would come onto the TPUSA, question and answer periods, and they would ask these very leading questions, about why does the U.S. give so much aid to Israel? Charlie Kirk, why do you have openly gay people supporting the conservative movement, advocating for the conservative movement? If gay people can be conservative, then what are we trying to conserve? Charlie Kirk, why do you support open immigration? If demographic change is going to destroy the conservative movement, things like this. Just to make my biases clear, I don't like either of these people. I really don't. I think Charlie Kirk is, he just comes off as very opportunistic. He comes off as someone who will simply support Trump, like whatever Trump says he'll support. Or does he? We'll get to that later. And with Nick Fuentes, his sense of humor, if that's what you really want to call it, is just gross. I don't care for his style at all. And I don't know, why is he always bringing up the Jews? Like, it's just kind of stupid. Anyway, but a big part of the Groyper War is what is going to be the legacy of conservatism? And these are from two youth leaders of the conservative movement. With Charlie Kirk, the future would be the kind of sort of establishment, fusionist, libertarian light, pro-free market conservatism that has dominated the movement since the 1960s, since Barry Goldwater. With Nick Fuentes, it would be where we're going to advocate free markets maybe aren't bad, but we don't like big corporations. And you know what? If free markets mean supporting social progressivism, open borders, open immigration, free trade, then you know what? We don't want it. These things are more important to us. Keeping traditional American values, keeping traditional America in line. And both of them, which is very interesting, want to pin their movements onto the rise of Donald Trump. Charlie Kirk wrote this book called The MAGA Doctrine, right? This is my doctrine and this is the MAGA doctrine. This is Trump's doctrine. This is how it's going to save America. And of course, it's a very pro-free market, very hawkish, very, pro-free trade, pro-high immigration look of conservatism. Nick Fuentes, we're the real Trump supporters. We're the originals, we're the populists, we're the paleocons, we're the traditionalists. This is what Trump ran on. Restrained foreign policy, we're not supporting all of, he says all of Israel's wars. We're not going to have free trade. We're going to have tariffs. We're going to protect American industry. We're going to protect American values. Men and women are going to be in their traditional places throughout history. And this is what Trump ran on. Well, if we're judging the success of the Groyper movement based on Trump and, what happened with Trump, I think we can already tell who won. It was Charlie Kirk. And, this is why I said Charlie Kirk doesn't so much as agree with everything Trump says. It's that Trump slowly came to agree with everything Charlie Kirk and his wing of the conservative movement said. And here's what I mean. So if you look at the conservative movement, and if you look at Donald Trump's rise in 2015, Trump was so different because he ran on this sort of populist political platform that was so at odds with GOP orthodoxy. So it was different in three respects. We're going to be very hawkish on immigration, including legal immigration. We're going to be less free trade. NAFTA was a terrible idea. We're losing our manufacturing jobs to the Chinese and the Mexicans. This is screwing us over as Americans. And finally, we're way too involved in the world. You know, we don't need to be in Syria. We don't need to be harassing Russia. We don't need to be, you know, overthrowing this dictator, that dictator. We're only going to protect America. If we're going to be hawkish on anyone, it's going to be the Chinese. But and even that, we're not going to war. We're just going to be tough on trade. This is what Trump ran on. So we'll call this, for the sake of argument, and for the sake of this video, we're going to call this movement populism, and we'll call Kirk's movement establishment conservatism, or GOP orthodoxy. So Trump wins in 2016. Well, how has he ran? He's ran as an establishment conservative politician. His signature economic policy has not been some major infrastructure bill. It's not been some, you know, economic plan aimed at, you know, revitalizing the manufacturing class and, you know, helping workers in the Rust Belt. It's been a tax cut. Now, maybe that's helped people. It certainly seems to make our economy better. I'm not necessarily opposed to all these things, but it's a standard GOP bill. This is not something you needed a populist for. More interestingly, well, first, now let's look at social issues, because part of this populist tinge too, which I don't think Trump really emphasized a lot, but part of this populist surge was a sort of anger by social conservatives that the GOP establishment wasn't doing enough to preserve social mores, particularly when it came to gay marriage. I mean, Trump couldn't care less about LGBT issues. I mean, he could not care less about any of that stuff. It's better than having he's not actively trying to clamp down on churches or anything because they oppose homosexuality. But this is not a guy, I mean, when we think of Donald Trump, the last thing I think of is traditional values. And then most interestingly has been his foreign policy. Now, Trump's foreign policy, I've actually kind of liked quite a bit of it. But I was actually thinking about it. The most successful parts of Donald Trump's foreign policy have been the hawkish moments. It hasn't been the more restrained moments. I'll give you an example. So the killing of Qasem Soleimani, very typical Republican move. You know, we're going to airstrike a top Iranian general. We're getting involved. We're hitting back at the Iranians. They're a nasty group of government. We're gonna hit them. Now, I was amazed at how remarkable this was. I mean, just how this all went down. I mean, everyone thought Trump was going to get us involved in a war. Not only did that not happen, the Iranian people rallied around this killing of Qasem Soleimani, and there were huge protests against the Iranian government. And I mean, it really exposed on a level that I hadn't seen, I mean, I've never seen, the amount of dissatisfaction so many Iranians have with their government. I mean, it really was a win for Trump, the killing of Qasem Soleimani. That was a win for Trump. But let's look at where he wasn't so hawkish. The withdrawal from Syria, which happened in October, November of 2019. I didn't want us getting involved in Syria. I don't like that we're in Syria. I just think it's not in our interest to be in Syria. That being said, I think Trump's withdrawal and handling of withdrawal was a disaster. I think it was. I mean, it was haphazard. It came out of nowhere. I mean, I think it was moronic to withdrawing from Syria should not mean just letting Turkey annex northwestern Syria. I mean, that was ridiculous. It led to the release of ISIS prisoners. It led to attacks on indigenous Christian communities in northwestern Syria. And now it looks like it's basically going to restart fighting in a place that was stabilized between the Turks and the Syrian government. So, you know, that was a disaster. Then there was this withdrawal from Afghanistan. Again, I think Trump has the right instincts to withdraw from Afghanistan. Well, it already seems like the Taliban is violating the ceasefire. So, you know, that went great. And I was like, well, what's wrong here? Why, when it comes to foreign policy, why am I more impressed with Trump's hawkishness than his dovishness? I don't think it's because, I've changed my mind on, having a more restrained foreign policy, but I think it's because Trump has the apparatus, when he wants to be hawkish, he has the apparatus to pull off a successful hawkish conservative policy. When he wants to withdraw from a country, he doesn't have the means to do that. Because who has he surrounded himself with once he got into his administration? Mostly establishment conservatives, for the most part. There were people like Steve Bannon who I don't know how much Steve Bannon really believes in anything, but, he made appeals to more populist sections of conservatism and, unfortunately the alt-right. But, he was gone pretty quickly. The rest of it, you look at someone like Rex Tillerson. Rex Tillerson seemed to be an advocate of a more restrained United States foreign policy. He was out pretty quickly. You got John Bolton. He was pretty typical hawkish GOP official. Now, if Trump wanted to withdraw from Syria, was Bolton going to help him with that? No, Bolton was going to tell him to stay within Syria. So this is the thing. Again, when Trump wants to move the embassy to Jerusalem, there's a whole section in the GOP that's very pro-Israel. They're going to help him with that. Who's going to help him if he wants to, reset relations with Russia? Not be so hawkish towards Russia. Who in the GOP is going to help him with that? No one. You know what they're going to help him do very effectively? Give lethal aid to Ukraine. So this is the problem. The thing is, Donald Trump has been doing remarkably well at being an establishment Republican, probably better than any other establishment Republican, because he doesn't have that same sense of moderation that a career politician would have. I'll give you a good example of this. I went to a conservative fundraiser, and there was a man there. He was the head of some conservative pro-family institute, and he was meeting with Donald Trump. Now, I don't know if you guys remember, Donald Trump, by tweet, banned transgender people from being in the military. So if you were a biological male, but you identified as a female, you could not be in the, female reserves in the Army, right? He banned that just by tweet all of a sudden. Well, this is because this head of this socially conservative group I was talking to was talking to Trump, expressing his concern about transgender people in the military. And what did Trump do? 5 minutes later, he went to Twitter and banned transgender people in the military via Twitter. President George W. Bush would never have done that. As much of a sincere evangelical as he may have been, he never would have done that. Because someone like George W. Bush has a sense of moderation. He understands, he has the sense in his head, I can't just do something like that. Like, I got to think about, what the Democrats would say. I got to think about what the media would say. I got to think about what fellow Republicans would say. Same thing with moving the embassy to Jerusalem. This had been something people had wanted for a long time. And, I'm sure there was a pro-Israel group that had met with Trump and said, we want the embassy in Jerusalem. Immediately, what do you think Donald Trump did? Move the embassy to Jerusalem. If that was H.W. Bush, if that was a President Mitt Romney, they would have thought, it's really going to cause a lot of controversy, and I can't do that. And Donald Trump does not have any sense of controversy, right? He doesn't care. Now, on the flip side, on the populist angle, Donald Trump is not a statesman. So he doesn't know, even if he has good instincts, he doesn't know how to carry those out. So he wants to pull out of Syria. I think he's right to do that. He doesn't know how to negotiate an exit properly, nor does he have the people surrounding him who are going to help him negotiate this exit properly. Why? Because it's like the whole populist revolution wasn't much of a revolution. It was Donald Trump, and then all the establishment conservatives stayed there. They didn't go away. He picked them all, right? Even the Supreme Court picks, they're not radical. I like the Supreme Court picks, but they're not deviant from GOP orthodoxy. Why? Because he went to the Federalist Society, right? Which was a typical conservative organization. So Donald Trump ran on the back of populist sentiment, but he didn't surround himself with people who, had that view. If he put head of his economic policy someone like Orrin Cass, right? Someone who is talking about a conservative economic policy that protects manufacturing, an economic policy that encourages the growth of families and things like that. Well, he doesn't have that. If he put someone like Angela Codevilla, who talks about how the U.S. needs to not, again, a conservative guy who talks about how the U.S. doesn't need to be invading every last country, right? How the United States needs to have a policy that puts its own interests first. I mean, who is like that in the GOP establishment? You don't have anyone like that because the GOP has been hawkish for the past 40 years. So this is kind of the problem. And this is why I say Charlie Kirk won the Groyper Wars. Because at the end of the day, Donald Trump is running a Charlie Kirk presidency. He's not running a Nick Fuentes presidency. Sorry, he's not. The only thing that's been unchanged about Donald Trump is his Twitter account. That's the only thing. His kind of pugnacious, kind of often vulgar style of rhetoric, that's the only thing that's been left unchanged. Everything else, he's been disciplined into a standard Republican president, both for good and bad. Because, I'm sympathetic to a lot of the more populist claims, but I don't necessarily think establishment conservatism is all bad either. And this is sort of the silly thing, and this is where, Fuentes has a lot of problems in my opinion, but it's sort of silly for him going around saying, we are, the America First Trump supporters. Really? Because it seems like Charlie Kirk's wing of the movement is ascendant within the Trump presidency right now. Not any kind of paleocon tendency, not any sort of Tucker Carlson populist tendency, not any sort of, protectionist tendency. It's all GOP orthodoxy. What you're getting with a Trump presidency, for the most part, is what you would have gotten if Mitt Romney was president in 2012, except on steroids. Because Trump does not have the sense of moderation that Romney would have had, for good and for bad. So I just think that's something to keep in mind. I think, Fuentes' movement is mostly online, and I think they do bring up some good critiques, I have to say, particularly about the place of social conservatism and how it just seems like Kirk just kind of puts that on the back burner. And really, a lot of conservatism, unfortunately, has done that for the past 40 years. They put that on the back burner, and we sort of hyper-emphasized free markets. But yeah, who basically runs the GOP at this point? It's Charlie Kirk's wing of the party. It's not Nick Fuentes' coalition of the party. So I just think Fuentes' supporters need to keep that in mind.